459 remains were accidentally discovered in the depths of a karst sinkhole hidden from foreign eyes on the highway BR 319 in Brazil. On in the same strange injury, a broken cervical vertebra and the absence of fingers on the right hand indicated that someone was acting methodically and cold-bloodedly. What connected these people to each other? How long this series of mysterious disappearances lasted and why nobody noticed anything? This became the darkest puzzle of this discovery. The excavator of the construction company, Guterra Ltd, was reinforcing an embankment next to the highway BR 319 at the 127th kilometer when suddenly the shovel sharply sank downward and exposed a deep sinkhole. The work was immediately stopped. The location proved to be not just a natural cavity. Deep below, under a limestone layer, human remains were discovered. Their number shocked even experienced criminalists. 459 people, and in each case the same cervical vertebra was broken, and on the right hand the fingers were cleanly sawed off. Forensic experts had no doubt. Whoever had done this acted methodically and calmly. But where did these people come from? Who exactly was behind what had happened? At first glance, there were many more questions than answers. The depth of the sinkhole was about 7 meters. The crater had an elongated shape about 10 by 15 meters, and its bottom was completely strewn with lime. Specialists immediately noticed. Such a method is used when one wants to hide traces and reduce the smell of decay. At the edge of the pit, they found an old jack of the crocodile type, manufactured 1996. The tool lay as if it had been hastily dropped. From the pit led a single path between the trees to one of the arms of the Rio Negro about 1 kilometer from the crime scene. Judging by the traces, recently a person, or even several, had walked this way. Who and where went on this path became the first important question of the investigation. The first to be questioned was foreman Paulo S. Miranda, a middle-aged man who has worked on construction sites in the region for over 20 years. Miranda seemed disturbed, but answered the questions openly. He reported that the excavator had already been at the construction site for about a week. Until this moment, the work had proceeded quietly. He denied knowing about the pit or having seen anyone suspicious nearby. However, the investigators already harbored a different suspicion. A few kilometers from the discovery site of the mass grave on the coast of the Rio Negro, activity of a gold digger gang called Garimpo Nova Era had previously been registered. Members of this group repeatedly appeared in cases connected with the disappearance of locals and visitors who were engaged in illegal gold mining. Their motive seemed completely clear. People who interfered with their business disappeared forever. However, such a scope of activities was untypical even for cruel gold diggers. 459 disappeared, too many not to attract the attention of police or military. The situation was complicated by the same jack that was found next to the sinkhole. Soon, the investigators established that exactly the same tool was present at Miranda's construction site. The officers briefly thought that everything was obvious and that Miranda could be directly connected to this case. However, the forensic expertise destroyed this theory within a few hours. The fingerprints on the found jack belonged to a completely different person. Miranda was not lying. His version of non-involvement seemed completely confirmed. But if not he, who and why left this object there? While the investigators discussed how to proceed, a report came from the border post about strange activities a few kilometers downstream. On one of the tributaries of the Rio Negro, 4 kilometers from the discovery site of the sinkhole, lay a suspicious boat named Barolus. Amazing was that the ship was practically invisible to the surveillance system. The radio beacon was switched off. Normally, such cargo ships in the year 2022 always use switched-on radio buoys to control their location. This meant someone wanted very much to remain unnoticed, and so much so that he risked violating federal legislation and attracting police attention. At this moment, the investigation still had not a single concrete suspect. 459 disappeared people, whose names still had to be established, lay at the foundation of one of the most extensive criminal puzzles of modern Brazil. The found Jack proved to be a false lead. Miranda was factually crossed off the suspects, and the mysterious Barolus, which stood quietly away from the main routes and had its beacon switched off, could both bring closer to the solution and lead the investigation even further from the truth. But the most important question remained. Why were traces of people so methodically hidden over many years, as the condition of the remains showed? Whoever was behind it could act secretly and carefully. He was certainly still somewhere nearby and watching how gradually the truth was being uncovered that he had carefully hidden. The first day of investigation ended in absolute uncertainty. But nobody from the investigative team could even imagine how strange and confusing the events of the next days would become. The morning of the 5th of October began with a new turn in the case. The investigative group of the federal police had already dropped the main suspicions against Paulo Miranda, the foreman of the company Gutera Limited. However, after checking the equipment register from the previous day, it became clear that Miranda was hiding something. The register that Miranda kept recorded departures and arrivals of equipment at the construction site. According to official records, the excavator that exposed the sinkhole was sent on the 4th of October to a completely different object. The entry looked natural. Signature of the foreman, ordinary company form, serial numbers of the equipment. But the investigative group quickly discovered that factually, the excavator did not go anywhere that day, and the driver confirmed that he worked exactly at BR 319. This meant only one thing. Someone had intentionally falsified the registers. Miranda was summoned to the federal police headquarters in Manaus. In the officer's office, he was tense, but still answered clearly and consistently. When shown the register with his own signature, he was silent for only a second, then calmly explained that he did not remember this entry. He claimed not to have made it himself and expressed readiness to undergo any expertise. The graphological examination confirmed his words. The signature was similar to the original but did not belong to him. Meanwhile, specialists from the economic department of the federal police checked Miranda's banking history. In examining his financial past, they discovered a strange transfer from a charitable organization called Ministério Curador. The payment of 25,000 Brazilian reais was made in distant 1999, when Miranda was a young specialist. In itself, this would not arouse suspicions, were it not for the strange coincidence. The bank through which the payment was sent had long since gone bankrupt. However, the SWIFT code of the transfer remained in its register. This meant that the transfer was carefully documented. Why an organization that specialized in religious activity and charity transferred a large sum to a simple foreman remained unclear. Miranda was summoned again and asked to explain the strange payment. He seemed surprised and even confused. At first he said that he remembered nothing about Ministério Curador. However, when he learned the date, he frowned and informed the investigator that around this time he worked at one of his first objects in the Manaus area. In those years, he often took side jobs, but from whom exactly the money came, he claimed, he had not given thought. In further checking his alibi, the investigators established that Miranda, on the 3rd of October 2022, was actually traveling on the barge Flor da Selva, which sailed from his hometown to Manaus. The distance of 96 kilometers was covered in a few hours. All tickets and boarding passes were provided to the investigation. Thus, Miranda could not physically be at the location at the time of the direct event before the discovery of the sinkhole. Nevertheless, one version remained workable. It was suspected that Miranda could have received the money from Ministério Curador to hide or camouflage this sinkhole. Supporting this version was the fact that the sinkhole was strewn with lime, and traces of a person at the location clearly showed an attempt to hide traces. However, the version soon began to crumble. First, why was the transfer made so long before, still in 1999, over 20 years before the discovery of the remains? Second, The sum, although considerable for that time, did not look like sufficient payment for such extensive actions after decades. But the most important thing turned out later, when graphology experts once again checked the documents about the transfer. The signature on the bank papers was seemingly identical to Miranda's signature. However, careful analysis clearly showed that it too was a forgery. The graphology expert informed the investigators that the signature on the transfer from Ministerio Curador, although similar to the real one, did not belong to Miranda. Someone was obviously trying to connect Miranda with the money and the organization that had remained in the shadows for many years. This discovery brought the investigators back to the organization Ministerio Curador. Given the fact that the bank had long ceased to exist and the transfer was still dated to 1999, the officers decided to officially request all available documents regarding the activity of this organization from the Federal Archive and the Tax Authority. The investigation had to understand who actually stood behind the transfer, who was the true recipient of this money, and why someone after such a long time suddenly decided to connect precisely Paulo Miranda with it. The strange financial trail, almost accidentally discovered, opened a new page of this tangled case. None of the officers doubted any more that solving this crime would become much more difficult than it initially seemed. At this stage of the investigation, the police knew one thing for certain. Whoever was behind the mass discovery on BR 319, he carefully confused the traces and hid behind foreign names and forged documents. Miranda was no longer the main suspect, but he had obviously become an important part of this puzzle. The investigation was approaching a new, no less gloomy chapter, which was destined to confuse the already difficult case even more. A week after the discovery of the strange transfer in Miranda's name, the investigation approached closely a new important discovery. Employees of the forensic laboratory received the first results of DNA identification. One of the first confirmed personalities turned out to be completely unexpected. It was Fernanda Moura, who had disappeared many years ago, in May 1992. The family was told at that time that their daughter had disappeared without a trace. However, the girl's parents claimed the opposite for a long time. Fernanda had allegedly returned home completely healed after a year, following a certain religious practice. And now, almost 30 years later, it became clear that the parents were probably telling the untruth, or they were made to believe a lie. When the officers arrived in the village of Itapiranga, about 150 kilometers from Manaus, the Moura family's house looked ordinary, typical for these places. Fernanda's parents, Maria and José, received the investigators suspiciously but calmly. When they learned about the new circumstances, they repeated without arguing their earlier version. The daughter disappeared but returned after a year, healed, after staying at the center of a spiritual organization. They sincerely believed their story. The words were simple and convincing, spoken without a hint of doubt. The investigators presented the family with documents from social services found in the regional archive. In José's hands was the original of a certificate of miraculous healing, signed by a representative of the Ministerio Curador. The strangeness of the document consisted in the fact that it gave the Moura family the right to benefits through the Foam Zero program, which officially started only in 2003. The certificate was signed with a backdated date, which raised even more questions. The rural house filled with silence. José looked at his wife, then slowly said that he had never noticed the date on this document before. The spouses claimed they had simply received the paper many years ago, and someone from the representatives of local authorities told them that they now had special status. In reality, this meant help in the form of food that was delivered regularly without questions. Precisely this help saved their family in difficult times. Maria added in the conversation that many had such papers, and people didn't discuss them. The officers asked José and Maria directly whether they knew that Fernanda had actually never returned. José answered very simply, "We saw her, alive and healthy." Maria added, She returned different, as if someone had blessed her. The investigators could not understand how such an obvious lie could exist in the family for years. The version was put forward that the family could consciously mislead the authorities in order to receive help from the state through benefits that were only available to holders of such documents. However, at the sight of the simple and obviously not inclined to cunning country people, this version seemed unlikely. The police checked the Moura family's environment and heard statements from neighbors. People claimed that Fernanda actually returned, but communicated almost with no one except her parents. The investigation at times considered the possibility that the family could hide the circumstances of what happened, possibly even participation in Fernanda's disappearance, in order to receive material benefit. However, experts soon received another result that definitively closed this theory. The isotope analysis of Fernanda's remains showed clear traces of corn nutrition, a diet exclusively characteristic of coastal areas of the Amazon, but not for deep villages like Itapiranga, where the nutritional basis traditionally consisted of manioc and native fish. This meant one thing: the girl was definitely not at home after her disappearance. She spent the last time of her life far from the village, along the shores of large rivers, possibly in one of the remote settlements of the Amazon. Thus, the suspicions were completely removed from the family. Jose and Maria perceived what happened without particular emotions, but from their eyes it was clear. They were only now beginning to understand what strange deception they had lived in all these years. Now the investigation concentrated on the origin of the strange documents about miraculous healing. Who and why printed these papers with backdated dates? How did they penetrate into the archives of social services? And who exactly could be behind this scheme that brought families to silence for years? The federal police immediately began checking all organizations and printing houses that could be involved in producing official forms that were issued long before the start of the Foam Zero program. The document in Fernanda Moura's name became the key to uncovering an even more extensive scheme. Now, no one doubted anymore that the discovery of 459 remains on Highway BR 319 was not just a mass disappearance. Behind it stood a carefully organized structure, possibly connected with the same mysterious organization, Ministerio Curador. And the key to uncovering it was hidden in a simple sheet of paper found in the archive of a small village, lost in the jungles of the Amazon. In the early morning of the 20th of October, the Federal Police Operational Group returned to the location of the cast funnel on Highway BR 319. Now they had divers available, specially delivered for the complete examination of the inner part of the pit, which after the previous discoveries had gained the significance of a strategic object. After several hours of work, the divers handed over to the investigators something unexpected: a compact AIS beacon of type TD-206. The device looked old and had been underwater for a long time, which complicated the identification process. Nevertheless, through the serial number, it turned out that this specific beacon was officially removed from service on the 26th of March 2019. The question arose about the origin and purpose of the device, which is normally used by ships for automatic transmission of location. To clarify the details, the beacon was immediately taken to the port of Manaus, where police began checking its records. It was precisely here that it turned out that the device belonged to the ship Barolus, and was officially written off and switched to manual mode about 3 years ago. According to documents, this work was performed personally by Helena Barbosa, an experienced mechanic of the port of Manaus. Barbosa was summoned for urgent interrogation. She came calmly to the police station, without visible signs of agitation, and immediately confirmed her work on removing the automatic beacon from the ship. To confirm her words, she presented a delivery receipt stating that the AIS beacon from Barolus was dismantled and officially switched to manual mode. When the investigators asked to explain the reason for shutting off automatic data transmission, Barbosa answered simply, "The customer wanted to avoid constant monitoring of the route." To the question of whether such a wish had raised doubts in her, she shrugged and noted that such requests occur regularly, especially among ships working with illegal miners or local transporters. The officers asked to name the customer. Helena said without hesitation, Josias Tavares, the locals call him Garimpo. This name was already known to the investigators. Josias Tavares was connected with the same gold mining group, Garimpo Nova Era, that had been repeatedly suspected of people disappearing in the Amazon region. The interrogation continued in the direction of financial aspects. Helena confirmed that the work was paid in cash, like many other similar orders at the port. No checks or documents except the presented delivery receipt remained with her. Barbosa answered confidently and clearly, repeating the same name, Josias Tavares. However, the officers quickly developed doubts about her version. The matter was that the name Tavares had already appeared in old police reports, and the federal police sent a request to the Forensic Office archive to verify the information. As a result, they received an unexpected answer that completely changed the picture of what happened. Josias Garimpo Tavares was considered dead as early as 2018, a year before the AIS beacon was written off. This fact could not be a coincidence or error. Tavares' death was confirmed by official documents of the office and witness testimonies, which meant that the delivery receipt presented by Helena Barbosa turned out to be a forgery. The investigators returned to Barbosa with the verification results and demanded explanations. Helena now seemed confused but maintained calm, firmly insisting that the customer himself had given her this name. According to her words, she never checked customers' documents, limiting herself only to performing technical work. Forgery or not, that was not her problem. Barbosa continued repeating that she had no reason to doubt the customer's words and simply did what she was paid for. But the investigators understood that now before them stood a completely different task: to find out who and why decided to use the name of the long-deceased Josias Tavares to hide their actions. The false trail connected with Tavares was taken into processing, and the officers began a parallel verification to finally confirm its invalidity or uncover hidden connections. At the same time, a separate group of investigators dealt with investigating the scheme of the ship Barolus. The AIS beacon discovered at the bottom of the cast sinkhole clearly testified that someone carefully sought to hide the routes of this ship. Such behavior is normally characteristic of those who engaged in illegal transport of people, goods, or pursued other unlawful actions. Now the officers saw a clear connection between the actions of the unknown owner of the boat, documents with forged signatures, and the mass grave on the highway BR 319. On the same evening, the beacon TD 206 was sent to the laboratory of the Forensic Service for additional expertise to check it for microtraces of paint and other particles that could have remained on its surface. If even the slightest traces of paint coatings or primers characteristic of specific ship types are discovered on the beacon, this will help the investigation approach solving the puzzle. For every ship has a unique chemical profile of paint coating that is easily identifiable with modern laboratory capabilities. With the onset of night, the federal police headquarters sank into silence. The officers knew that the key to the solution was already somewhere nearby. The AIS beacon that someone so carefully sought to hide could become decisive evidence and lead the investigation directly to the owner of the boat. He was obviously the central link in this complex network, but someone was making every effort to confuse the traces by using false documents, long-dead people, and a carefully thought-out system of false trails. Now, all police forces were directed toward the ship Barolus, in whose scheme something was obviously hidden that went beyond the ordinary criminal schemes of the region. Precisely this ship, the AIS beacon, and the forged delivery slip should soon lead the investigation to answers that were still hidden in the depths of the Amazon forests. Soon, the laboratory should give the final answer about the microparticles found on the beacon. Then, and only then, could the investigation continue. Until that moment, the officers could only wait, methodically collecting hundreds of small but important details capable of unveiling the darkest and most extensive secret of Brazil in recent decades. On the morning of the 24th of October, the federal police undertook an unexpected operation: an armed assault on the illegal gold miners' camp, Garimpo Nova Era. The officers carefully prepared the raid, taking into account previous suspicions against this gang. Confusion reigned in the camp as the policemen brought the object under complete control in a few minutes. Soon, a detailed search of the territory began. Almost immediately, one of the huts at the edge of the camp drew the police's attention. Inside, surrounded by many different tools and equipment, the officers discovered a carjack model 2017, externally similar to the one found at the cast sinkhole. Also in the camp, somewhat apart from the center of the base, sacks of lime were discovered, about 400 kilograms. These finds aroused immediate interest among the investigators. Expert criminalists began operational verification. The first version consisted in that precisely this gang could use lime and the carjack to hide traces of the mass crime. At first glance, the coincidences seemed convincing and logical. However, the financial analytics of the federal police immediately joined the case. Specialists in material procurement and logistics conducted a calculation whose result revealed a significant problem. The volume of lime necessary to hide the previously discovered mass grave was about 8 tons. However, the gang had only 400 kilograms in stock. This was obviously insufficient for an extensive operation to cover up traces, which meant that the investigators encountered a new contradiction. On site, the officers conducted an urgent interrogation of the gang members. One of the older gold miners, a man named Carlos Pinto, explained that the lime was bought for domestic needs of the camp, for disinfecting waste pits and combating infections under jungle conditions. The carjack, according to his words, belonged to one of the new workers and was used exclusively for repairs of cars and heavy equipment. Pinto said he did not even know that this carjack was an old model. We take what we can get. Meanwhile, the investigators waited for the result of the chemical analysis. The laboratory should give the final answer whether the lime samples from the pit and from the gold miner's base matched. Without this, the investigation stood still despite serious suspicions against the gang. Meanwhile, the press quickly learned of the operation. Local journalists rushed to sensational conclusions and already published news with loud headlines about how allegedly the cemetery of victims of the gold miners' gang was found. The information wave spread rapidly across the country, created public pressure, and intensified the chaos around the investigation. The federal police, on the contrary, remained restrained and awaited official analysis results and conclusions from the criminalists. And after a few hours, the laboratory provided a report on the chemical composition of the samples. The result was categorical. The lime found at the base, Garimpo Nova era, differed significantly from the samples from the cast sinkhole. The lime from the base contained about 9% magnesium oxide, while in the hole on BR 319, this indicator did not exceed 3%. This was a clear chemical marker that unambiguously excluded the version of the gang's involvement in the burial. No less important became the expert opinion on the carjacks. The expertise confirmed that the models of the carjack found among the gold miners and the one that lay at the sinkhole also did not match. The visual similarity proved to be deceptive. This meant that the initial suspicions were based on false assumptions. On this basis, the police officially declared that Paulo Miranda, who was indirectly connected to the case because of a similar carjack, was finally freed from all suspicions. All traces that could connect the foreman with the mass grave were finally exhausted and recognized as untenable. Thus, both the version of the gold miners' gang's involvement and the version about Miranda's role were closed. All these suspicions proved logical only at first glance, but careful fact-checking destroyed them. Now the investigators returned again to the only remaining clue, to the activity of the mysterious organization, Ministerio Curador. It became clear that precisely there, the key answers were hidden. The federal police decided to immediately strengthen the verification of documents regarding the activity of Ministerio Curador. The investigation had obviously approached the true solution, and now every effort of the officers was directed toward unveiling the secret that had been carefully guarded for many years. While the gold miners' gang remained under police control, the investigators were certain. The true culprit of the events connected with the cast sinkhole remained at large. and precisely him they had to encounter before the traces finally disappeared in the depths of the Amazon jungle. On the 28th of October, the federal police shifted the focus of the investigation to the small settlement Porto Rosa, located on the shore of one of the Amazon tributaries, 185 kilometers from Manaus. The officers' attention was drawn to the strange certificates that had been discovered earlier during the investigation of Fernanda Moura's disappearance. When checking the social archives of the settlement, the police discovered amazing statistics. Of almost 600 inhabitants of Porto Rosa, 112 had certificates of miraculous healing in their hands, the same cura milagrosa. This was a truly anomalous indicator. Such documents did not officially exist before 2003, yet they were issued long before the start of the Bolsa Familia program. The investigators had to understand why the inhabitants massively accepted obviously dubious papers and who distributed these forms. The villagers reacted to the police visit with caution, but without panic. They openly admitted that the certificates brought real benefits. The documents gave priority in participating in the social program Bolsa Familia, as well as simplified access to medical help in Manaus. The residents did not hide that precisely these benefits were vital for their families. The police noticed that most locals sincerely considered the papers genuine despite obvious inconsistencies. To the question of who exactly provided these certificates, the residents answered simply, people from the administration. However, when the investigators questioned several employees of the local mayor's office, they unanimously declared that they did not print and did not issue the certificates. Further, the investigators checked the mayor of the settlement, João Ribeiro. During the conversation, the mayor seemed troubled but held himself confidently. Ribeiro explained that he had known about these documents for a long time, but was not occupied with checking their origin since they helped the local residents very much. To the question of who personally handed over these forms, the mayor unexpectedly answered that he saw a representative of the organization Ministerio Curador only once, around the beginning of the 2000s. He described the person in detail. A man, about 60 years old, thin, of tall stature, with simple glasses and always with a leather bag in his hands. The description given by the mayor matched the appearance of a person who had already appeared in the operational materials under the name Daniel Magalhães, 62 years old. At this moment, the version arose that municipal officials could print and distribute the forged forms for the sake of financial reimbursements or obtaining other benefits. The officials began checking the bank accounts of the Porto Rosa administration officials and connections to local entrepreneurs. The verification lasted several hours and revealed seemingly small, suspicious transactions at first glance. However, no direct evidence of involvement in the mass printing of forged documents was found. Suspicions remained, but the trail was too weak and required additional verification. The key moment became the confirmation of Daniel Magalhães' identity. Mayor João Ribeiro confirmed that the person who presented himself as a representative of the Ministerio Curador and distributed certificates exactly matched Magalhães' appearance. This was the first official testimony that directly connected Magalhães with the organization and the documents that had become the most important part of the investigation. Now, Daniel Magalhães officially became the object of federal police attention. Given the severity of the situation and the scope of the documents found, the prosecutor's office quickly issued an arrest warrant. The federal police urgently began searching for Magalhães. The investigators understood that they only had evidence for the distribution of false documents in their hands, but no direct proof of his involvement in the disappearances. Nevertheless, the officials were certain Magalhães could shed light on the activity of the Ministerio Curador organization. At the same time, it became clear why the residents of Porto Rosa did not report the false certificates to the authorities. The people were so dependent on the social assistance that these documents provided that no one even thought to check their authenticity. Collective silence was the result of survival, not conspiracy. The investigation took a step forward by having for the first time a concrete name and official description of the main suspect. Now it was necessary to find out what role Daniel Magalhães actually played in organizing the mass disappearances, and why hundreds of residents of a remote Amazon settlement were drawn into this tangled story in which lies, hope for survival, and cynical exploitation of people's social distress were carefully interwoven. The federal police prepared for the decisive stage of the investigation, aware that the answers to the main questions were hidden in the actions and motives of a person they were about to arrest. The morning of the 15th of November began with the long-awaited expert opinion from the forensic laboratory. Paint traces were found on the surface of the AIS beacon that had been discovered earlier in the sinkhole. The expertise results were unambiguous. The chemical composition completely matched the paint coating of the cabin doors of the boat Barolus. From this moment, there was no more doubt for the investigation. Precisely this boat became the key to solving the entire case. The federal police immediately obtained a search warrant for the ship. By noon, the officials were already on board. During careful examination of the interior spaces, they found almost nothing suspicious. However, after 3 hours of searching, a hiding place was discovered in one of the rear cabins, behind wooden wall paneling. Inside lay an old, worn book in leather binding. On its cover were drawn in black ink the words, "Quem traz o mal," those who bring evil. Experts working with the book informed the officials that before them lay a kind of leadership journal. It contained 463 entries. Each entry contained a name, a date, and a sum of a certain donation. After recounting, the investigators encountered an obvious discrepancy. The previously discovered remains belonged to 459 people, while there were 4 more entries in the journal. The investigators' attention was also drawn to the fact that the journal was filled with different inks: black, blue, and even red. The officials could not yet determine what this color code meant, but the fact remained. Magalhães kept records with particular pedantry and clarity. One of the officials questioned the harbor watchman, a 47-year-old man named Geraldo Costa. He appeared frightened, actively proved his innocence, and claimed that he saw people connected with gold miners throw the journal onto the ship. Costa persistently referred to certain gold miners who allegedly wanted to frame the boat owner. The investigators approached Geraldo's words cautiously. The version was too convenient and had not even been refuted at other stages of the investigation. Meanwhile, graphologists began examining the handwriting from the found journal. The comparison was conducted with documents that had appeared earlier in the case. The result was quick and convincing. The entire journal, from the first to the last page, was written by Daniel Magalhães' hand. The signature in the journal perfectly matched signatures on the property purchase contract concluded on the 11th of August, 2004. After receiving this data, the version of harbor watchman Geraldo Costa was definitively closed, and he was excluded from the list of suspects. Along with this expert opinion, the old version connected with the name of the previously deceased Josias Tavares also collapsed. The expertise confirmed. Magalhães used Tavares' name exclusively to camouflage his actions. Investigation materials that had previously indirectly pointed to Tavares were now officially considered closed. The false trail with Tavares was definitively and irrevocably eliminated. Nevertheless, the main riddle still remained. None of the officials could explain why Magalhães' journal contained 463 names, while real remains numbered 459. These 4 additional entries fit in no way into the logic of the investigation. The investigators understood that precisely this discrepancy could become the key to a new level of understanding the entire case. The federal police decided not to publicly announce the discovery of the journal. Instead, the officials organized round-the-clock surveillance of the ship directly at Pier Number 7 in the port of Manaus. The boat, Barolus, was carefully prepared for the arrest of the owner. The investigators knew that the boat owner had to appear at any moment, unaware of the found journal. Now everyone understood that the case was approaching its finale. The journal Quem traz o mal, the AIS beacon, Entries in social services, false certificates, forged delivery receipts. All of this connected in one figure, Daniel Magalhães. He was no longer just a suspect, but a person whose guilt was obvious to the investigators. It remained to wait until he appeared at the pier to ask the questions that had tormented everyone since the discovery of the sinkhole. The federal police no longer doubted. Magalhães personally kept records of all his actions, every victim, every detail, carefully hiding them from foreign eyes. The boat, Barolus, was not just a means of transport. It was a key part of an extensive criminal structure, behind which no one had noticed anything suspicious for many years. Now it remained only to wait. Daniel Magalhães had to appear himself to reclaim what he considered his property. And then, for the first time since the beginning of the investigation, he would be forced to speak. On the evening of the 20th of November, Daniel Magalhães was arrested by an operational group of the federal police on the bank of the Itapurunga River, at a remote point 224 kilometers from Manaus. He was stopped on a small wooden boat as he sought to escape further upstream. No surprise was reflected on his face. It seemed as if he had long expected this moment and calmly submitted to the police demands. The operation proceeded without complications and was carefully documented. During the initial search, a backpack was confiscated from Magalhães in which there was a strange object, a homemade plastic matrix dated 2020. Its shape exactly repeated the sawed-off finger joints that had become the special signature of the remains found in the sinkhole. Experts quickly confirmed DNA from 3 victims previously identified in the case was present on the matrix. During interrogation, Magalhães, outwardly completely calm, began speaking in enigmatic phrases, using expressions that obviously had special meaning for him. He repeatedly used the word combination, healed without family name. The investigators asked for explanation of whom exactly he meant and why these people were called that way. Daniel answered briefly, "They are no longer who they used to be. They have no past." While doing so, he refused to give complete names and any concrete information about the whereabouts of these people. A separate investigation group continued studying the journal that had been found earlier on the boat Barolus. The investigators specified why there were 463 entries in the journal but only 459 remains in the sinkhole. Magalhães smiled and said quietly, "The entries do not err. You err." But further questions about the reasons and meaning of the difference remained unanswered. The reason why the entries were made with different colors of ink also remained unclear. In an attempt to confuse the investigation, Magalhães unexpectedly declared that of the total number of registered people, 6 still live, and that the officers should urgently engage in searching for them. He claimed that they can be found if one makes an effort. The investigators perceived these words as a deliberate attempt to bring confusion into the course of the case, to dilute the charges and delay the inevitable. Nevertheless, the federal police officially checked his words. Several inquiries were directed to medical institutions and social services throughout the Amazon region. However, the verification showed a clear result. No medical station in the region had records of so-called miraculously healed people that Magalhães described. The words about 6 survivors proved to be a false and manipulative trick aimed at disorienting the investigation. At the same time, the operative group definitively closed the version according to which community officials could have been involved in serious crimes. Detailed verification revealed that although they printed fake forms of social certificates at Magalhães' request, none of them suspected the commission of crimes. They were completely excluded from the list of suspects, and this direction of the investigation was officially closed. After careful verification of all data and collected evidence, the federal police considered the investigation in its main phase to be completed. Final conclusions of the criminologists about the found matrix, the journal, and the nature of the evidence appeared in the case materials. The homemade template of finger joints finally explained how the uniform injury was achieved in all discovered remains. Now the investigation moved into a different phase, the judicial one. The Amazon prosecutor's office prepared an indictment and officially handed the case over to the jury court of the city of Manaus. In the indictment, Daniel Magalhães appeared as the main and only participant in this case. Nevertheless, some questions remained open. The most important of these were the discrepancy between the number of victims and entries in the journal, as well as the mysterious mention of the 6 survivors. Judges and investigators understood that the court proceedings would be difficult and lengthy, and that Magalhães would probably try to use every uncertainty in his favor. The federal police finished their work by providing the court with exhaustive evidence and materials that not only revealed the scope of the crime, but also the methods with which Daniel Magalhães acted. The journal, the matrix, the false certificates, and the boat Barolus itself. All of this became part of an extensive case that shook the region and the entire country. From now on, the word lay with the Manaus jury court, and exactly there the final answers should sound. However, while Magalhães calmly awaited the trial in the detention prison, no one could be sure until the end that all details of his actions were completely revealed. That was still a secret that now had to be solved by the jurors. The courtroom in Manaus was overcrowded. On the 17th of June 2024, the case that received the name 459 Nameless came to the final point. Defense and prosecution finished their performances. Since early morning, the atmosphere was tense, but the judge conducted the session coldly and clearly. In the center of the hall was Daniel Magalhães, calm and composed, as if what was happening did not concern him. The prosecutor presented the most important piece of evidence: notebooks that were discovered by the investigation in Magalhães' personal belongings and covered the period from 1998 to 2021. From the handwritten sermons, it became clear what ritual the former missionary performed under the pretext of healing. In his records was detailed the ritual of spirit liberation through neck breaking and cutting of finger joints of the right hand as a seal of purification. Relatives of the victims, convinced that they were thus freeing their loved ones from diseases and suffering, donated regularly. Victims were mainly people from poor, isolated communities of the Amazon region who desperately needed help and believed in the power of the mysterious sermons of Magalhães. The bookkeeping of the Ministério Curador was also revealed. The investigators carried out meticulous work by comparing the previously found journal with the boat journal of the boat Barolus. The records showed 463 people in Magalhães' personal journal and 612 in the boat journal. The investigation explained that the difference in numbers, 153 people, were those whom Magalhães presented as healed returned. In reality, these people never returned, but were only fictitious entries to calm relatives and continue receiving money. The mystery of the 4 additional entries in the journal to 463 people was also solved. These 4 were lost during transport on the river. Their remains fell overboard the boat during a strong storm. Therefore, they were not found in the cast funnel. The origin of the transfer of 25,000 reais that was sent in 1999 in the name of foreman Paulo Miranda was also revealed. This money was intended for the purchase of building materials with which the pit with the remains was later camouflaged. Miranda actually knew nothing about the purpose of the purchase, as he was convinced he was helping to build a religious object. The AIS beacon was switched off and taken from automatic mode, exactly so that after 2019 the routes of the boat Barolus could no longer be tracked. Lime, bought for trace concealment, was acquired through channels of the Ministério Curador in large batches until 2019. Then the purchases abruptly stopped. When the judge announced the decision of the jurors, who found Magalhães guilty on all charges, he unexpectedly jumped up and shouted through the entire hall, "Seis vivem! 6 live!" Following this, he tried to sharply break his neck, However, the court guard managed to intervene in time and prevent his suicide attempt. The hall gasped. Several people jumped from their seats. The judge immediately announced a break to restore order. After the break, the session continued in complete silence. The judge repeated the decision of the jurors once more. The Manaus jury court found Daniel Magalhães guilty under Articles 121, Paragraph 2 and 211 of the Criminal Code of Brazil. The final sentence was 459 life sentences, one for each proven victim. This was the maximum harsh punishment in the entire history of the state of Amazonas. The case was officially declared closed. All false versions of the investigation were carefully checked and rejected. The identity of the murderer, motives, schemes, and methodology of his actions were completely and exhaustively revealed. The mystery of the mass disappearances was definitively explained. However, a separate file with information about the 6 healed that Magalhães mentioned in court was officially classified. A document was also classified in which potential donors were mentioned who financed his activity outside the state of Amazonas. This information was never made public and remained under the heading secret. The federal police and the jury court closed one of the most extensive and darkest cases in modern Brazilian history. Nevertheless, the public still does not know everything today, and some questions remained without answers, hidden behind secrecy marks. Years later, the investigation in the case 459 Nameless was officially completed. Only the last route map of the Barolus remained, which demonstrated the path of the boat through the Amazon tributaries. It served as the last reminder of how deep a person can go in his quest to manipulate hope, fear, and despair of other people. This map became the last visual element of the story in which the truth proved to be more terrible than all assumptions and suppositions. On the night of the 18th of August 2024, 16-year-old Leona Monteiro disappeared on the quiet Portuguese island of Pico. After her night shift at a local cafe, she never arrived home. According to bank data, the girl bought a ticket for the night ferry to the neighboring island São Jorge, but upon arrival, Leona was not among the passengers. The mysterious disappearance of the student became the beginning of one of the most unusual investigations, in which there were more questions than answers. On the 18th of August 2024, around 7 o'clock in the morning, the phone of Leona's mother, Maria Monteiro, rang with a disturbing call. It was the manager of Café da Rocha who reported that 16-year-old Leona had gone home directly after closing the establishment, but had never arrived there. Maria called her daughter, but there was no connection. Leona's phone had been unreachable for several hours. The police quickly determined that at around 2 o'clock at night, a ticket for the night ferry São Jorge had been paid for with Leona's bank card. But among the passengers who arrived on São Jorge, no one had seen the girl. The camera recordings were examined. The payment terminal was hidden from the surveillance cameras. Who had actually bought the ticket and why became the first puzzle of this case? When questioning neighbors, a witness shared an important detail with the police. Around 2 o'clock at night, he had seen a white delivery van from the local bakery near the Monteiro family's house. This information was confirmed by checking the data from the GPS tracker of the service vehicle, which was indeed at Leona's house between 1:50 and 2:05 at night. On the same morning, in the area of Serra do Pico, popular with tourists, an unusual shoe print of size 43 was found with the sole characteristic of professional divers. This immediately aroused the interest of the police, as this type of shoe was a rarity and occurred exclusively among professional divers. There were only a few of them on the island. Furthermore, it turned out that the area around Serra do Pico was completely outside mobile phone coverage. Exactly here, on the same day, Leona's backpack was found, dry, despite the night rain. The police officers immediately covered the find site with a tarp to avoid destroying possible evidence. An important detail: the contents of the backpack were kept secret in the first phase of the investigation. Antonio Fernandes, Leona's stepfather, came into the focus of police investigations almost immediately. He was known for his strict character and strict control over his stepdaughter. The girl's mother confirmed to the police that Leona had had a serious argument with her stepfather on the evening before her disappearance. Maria did not want to reveal the topic of the conflict, but this gave the police sufficient reason to closely examine Antonio's personality and his financial transactions. Another suspect who appeared on the investigators' radar was João Santos, a diving instructor and close acquaintance of the family. It turned out that he was the owner of shoes with exactly that rare sole type that matched the traces found on Serra do Pico. João explained to the police that he had lost a pair of such shoes a few weeks ago, but provided no evidence for this. The investigators confiscated the trainer's shoes for expert examination. The police officers intensively questioned Antonio. The house was carefully searched, but no traces of a fight or any disorder were found. However, the mother's words about the conflict gave the investigators a serious reason to closely examine the financial side of Antonio's life and his possible motives regarding his stepdaughter. At this point, it seemed to the police that they were close to solving the case. Nevertheless, it soon became clear that Antonio, although suspicious, could not be the only object of the investigation. The investigators had to expand the search field and take a closer look at Leona's social environment. On the same morning, the investigators received another disturbing message. Tourists who were on the deck of the ferry Sinkhole during the night claimed to have clearly heard a splash in the water near the ship at 3:10. This information was recorded, although at that time it seemed only like a coincidence. But was it a coincidence? After all, in the morning, Leona's backpack was found dry and untouched despite the heavy rain. The investigative team decided to start with Leona's closest environment and examine in detail the behavior of those who had contact with her in recent days. Antonio Fernandes and diving instructor João Santos became the first suspects in this tangled story. Against the background of numerous questions and uncertainties, the police planned to carefully check their alibis and financial affairs. The investigations had just begun. On Antonio's bank accounts, a large transaction to a foreign online shop based in Singapore was discovered. The bank provided an invoice. Antonio had acquired expensive wildlife cameras for observing underwater life, which he used for his personal hobby, organizing private yacht tours for wealthy tourists. The date and time of the purchase completely matched the execution of the transaction. To confirm the purchase, the police organized a video conference with the shop's seller. An employee confirmed the purchase and described the goods in detail. But exactly this merchandise raised questions among the investigators. The wildlife camera proved to be 3 times more expensive than comparable devices on the market. Antonio calmly explained the overpayment with a custom-made optic, allegedly a unique lens system that was specially manufactured according to his order. To the question of why the payment was made in such an unusual way and not via traditional bank transfer, Antonio answered briefly, "The seller has no European account. I paid with the available method." This version sounded realistic and logical. To finally make sure that Antonio had nothing to do with Leona's disappearance, the police decided to carefully check his alibi. According to the stepfather's statement, he was on the Portuguese mainland on the night of the girl's disappearance. Antonio presented a SATA Airlines ticket showing that departure from Horta Airport had taken place early in the morning at 10:07. The investigators' doubts were obvious. The ticket could be forged, and the digital registration easily edited. Therefore, the police initiated an official inquiry to the airline. The authenticity of the ticket was verified through a special API service in the internal databases. The airline confirmed. Antonio had indeed boarded the plane on the specified day and at the specified time. A video recording from airport cameras showed that at 10:07, he calmly passed through control and was on the airport premises. This fact meant that Antonio could not physically participate in the events that occurred between midnight and 5 in the morning on Pico Island. After analyzing all data, the police officers tended to conclude that Leona's stepfather was not involved in her disappearance. His financial transactions were explainable and confirmed by the seller. His alibi matched perfectly in time, Antonio gradually came out of suspicion. It seemed as if the investigations were ready to move forward. However, during the last scheduled check of Antonio's personal devices, a strange detail was found that made the investigators pause again. On Antonio's laptop in the trash folder, experts discovered the deleted draft of an unsigned letter that was clearly written in Leona's name. The text was short and emotionally neutral. "I am leaving. Do not look for me. This is my decision. Do not blame anyone." At this point, there was no confirmation of the letter's authorship. For the investigators, a new point of uncertainty arose. Had Leona written this text herself, or had it been prepared by someone else? In connection with the found letter, the police began to direct their attention to Leona's environment. Perhaps the girl had planned her departure herself, or someone wanted to create this impression. The investigators decided to examine her personal contacts, friends, and closest environment in detail to understand possible personal motives that could have moved her to such a step. The owner of Café da Rocha handed over the keys to the police and reported that while cleaning the cafe, Leona's personal diary had been found, hidden in a drawer in the kitchen. The investigators examined the records carefully. The handwriting was neat, small, slightly hurried. The first pages contained no important information, only everyday notes and school assignments. But the last entries proved to be extremely important. "He has exploded again. If he finds out that I have decided to leave, the nightmare begins. Sofia said she would help me move in with her, but I must be careful." The name Sofia appeared. Leona's older sister, who lived separately on the island São Jorge. The police questioned Sofia immediately. The girl openly confirmed that she had spoken with her sister about the topic of moving. For confirmation, she presented a chat history in a messenger. Sofia had indeed helped Leona plan the departure and had bought the ticket for exactly the night ferry on which Leona had never appeared. However, a strange detail emerged. 1 hour before departure, Sofia unexpectedly cancelled her ticket. This was confirmed by documents from the Atlantic Ferries system. The police began questioning Sofia intensively to find out why Leona had undertaken the journey alone, although a joint move had been planned. Sofia explained her decision to cancel the ticket by claiming that she had allegedly received a warning from acquaintances about an approaching storm. Sofia claimed that she had written Leona a message precisely because of the weather. "Don't travel today, it will storm." According to her words, Leona had allegedly not responded, and the sister had decided that she would also stay home. However, a check of the harbor weather station records revealed exactly the opposite. That night, there was a normal breeze. The wind speed did not exceed the norm. The ferry captain's logbook confirmed. The weather was good. The journey proceeded calmly. A contradiction arose and Sofia came under intensive police observation. At the same time, the investigators questioned Leona's mother to understand why the family had concealed the conflict described in the diary. Maria Montero denied the existence of serious problems and claimed that the relationships within the family had been stable and calm. Nevertheless, Leona's records testified to the contrary. This discrepancy became an additional reason for doubt. Under conditions of growing uncertainty, the police began considering the version that Sofia might be indirectly involved in Leona's disappearance. The investigators suspected that Sofia might have lured her sister onto the ferry by exploiting the situation in the family to somehow punish the stepfather for his behavior toward both of them. At this point, however, the police had no direct evidence. Sofia categorically denied all suspicions against her and called such assumptions absurd. In the course of the investigation, the police made an important discovery that significantly changed the perception of the entire situation. A check of the Atlantic Ferries online booking system through which Leona and Sofia's tickets were purchased uncovered an unexpected digital trace. Experts noticed that on the night of the disappearance, someone had logged into Leona's personal account using Sofia's device. This fact was established through an ID check of the applications. The police could not immediately determine the motive and purpose of this action. Sophia claimed she knew nothing about this login and refused to answer further questions without a lawyer. At this moment, it became clear that the investigation had to reach a new level. The investigative authority officially requested help from the Digital Forensics Department in Lisbon to examine the sisters' electronic devices in detail and clarify the origin of the mysterious login to Leona's account. The digital traces now became the main focus of the case and opened a completely new investigation vector. During a scheduled technical inspection of the ferry, a mechanic discovered a strange object in the lower technical room of the cargo hold. It was a mobile phone without a SIM card. The police officers quickly determined the device's serial number matched completely with Leona's phone. A forensic examination confirmed the phone was last active on the night of Leona's disappearance at 1:57. Experts were able to partially restore the data. A photo was found on the phone that was taken at exactly this time. In the picture, an empty corridor of the ferry. According to the experts' calculations, only someone from the service personnel or the passenger herself could have reached the room where the phone was found via an emergency ladder. Getting there by accident was impossible. At the same time, witness Mario Alves, a mechanic who was on duty on the ship that night, stated that he had seen a girl on board at approximately the same time who asked him to help her find a cabin far away from people. According to his words, the girl seemed troubled but not confused. An important detail: the mechanic had previously been outside the investigator's field of view, had no connection to Leona or her family, and aroused no suspicion whatsoever. The investigators immediately established two versions of what happened. According to the first, Leona could have been intentionally locked in the cargo hold by someone. The second version was simpler. The girl might have hidden herself in the cargo hold. However, to check the feasibility of the versions, the investigators brought in a technical expert on ship doors and mechanisms. The expert reported that the doors to the cargo hold were not equipped with locks that could be used from the inside. Nevertheless, theoretically, one could have blocked the bolt with improvised means. This gave the investigators the insight that Leona might have stayed there voluntarily, but the reasons remained unclear. At the same time, the investigative authority officially ruled out another version that had previously emerged. On the 22nd of September 2024, a short story appeared on the TikTok network with a girl who looked very similar to Leona, allegedly in Lisbon. Initially, the version of Leona's escape to the mainland seemed plausible, but soon the police completely exposed the false trail. When checking the video's IP address, its author was identified: a local teenage prankster who fully admitted that the video was a staging. This fact was documented, and the version of Leona's escape to Lisbon was completely dropped. The examination of the digital data from Leona's phone continued. The forensic technicians from Lisbon used the professional software forensic tool version 6 to restore Leona's correspondence. And here there was a new important find. 17 minutes before the last activity of the phone, at 1:40, Leona's older sister Sophia sent her a short message with the code word fog. Almost immediately, at 1:45, the ferry's security system registered the unauthorized opening of a door on deck number 3. The investigators did not immediately understand what exactly Sophia's message meant. It was only clear that Sophia definitely knew more than she had previously told the investigators. In connection with this new circumstance, the police decided to reconstruct a real picture of Leona's movements on the ferry that night. For this, expert meteorologists and ship specialists were brought in. In the night, logbooks of the captain, it was noted that the wind strength at this time was 5 meters per second, sufficient for passengers to feel a slight movement on the deck, but posed no immediate danger. Exactly under these conditions, the investigators had to understand why Leona had left the safe zone and what actually could have happened next. Almost 9 months after Leona Montero's disappearance, the court officially announced the conclusion of the investigation: an accident. According to the investigation files, Leona had voluntarily hidden in the technical room of the ferry's cargo hold and waited for a message from her sister Sophia, with the code word fog. This meant that Sophia would arrive on the island with the next ferry in the morning, and they could meet in safety, away from family conflicts. The chronology of these minutes was restored with absolute precision. At 1:45, after receiving Sophia's message, Leona left her hiding place and stepped onto the technical platform of deck number 3. At exactly this moment, the girl lost her balance and fell overboard. The water temperature that night was only 16 degrees Celsius. The investigation concluded. Loss of orientation in the water, hypothermia, and drowning occurred quickly. In the darkness, with the noise of the engines, no one on board noticed the incident. During the court proceedings, all previous versions and moments of suspicion that had emerged during the investigation were eliminated one by one. The financial transactions of Leona's stepfather, Antonio Fernandez, were checked and recognized as lawful. The transaction to a foreign account was officially confirmed as the purchase of special equipment for his yacht business. The moments of suspicion were completely cleared and officially filed. The moments of suspicion against João Santos, the diving instructor, were also completely dispelled. His alibi was confirmed by GoPro recordings provided by 12 tourists with whom he was on a diving tour. The shoe print proved to be a coincidental match. The white delivery van seen near Leona's house on the night of the disappearance turned out to be a service vehicle of the local bakery. A receipt for the purchase of bread confirmed that the driver had stopped on his usual route, with no connection to the events. The draft of the letter, "I am leaving," found on Antonio's laptop was recognized as an authentic text by Leona herself. An expertise confirmed her authorship. It was a failed attempt to explain her decision to leave. The code word fog proved to be a simple allusion to childhood memories of Leona and Sophia. In their childhood, it meant, "We meet when the coast is clear." Sophia admitted that she had sent it to warn Leona that she herself would not arrive until morning. But the message came too late. Sophia did not want to explain the reasons for the delay and made use of her right not to testify against herself. During the final court hearing, which was transmitted with a dry, technical report without emotional interpretations, the investigators presented a three-dimensional reconstruction of the events based on GPS data from the ferry, security system, protocols and photos from Leona's phone. Her final steps were reconstructed to the second. When it became obvious that the girl had fallen into the water accidentally and without external influence, Maria Montero, Leona's mother, screamed emotionally that her daughter could have been saved if the stepfather had not insisted on concealing the conflicts within the family. The judge immediately interrupted the session and reminded that the court proceeding was not a place for emotional accusations without evidence. After completion of all expert examinations and analysis of the circumstances, the court rendered the final verdict. The death of Leona Montero occurred as a result of an accident through hypothermia and subsequent drowning. The court officially confirmed the absence of signs of external fault. The investigations in the case are definitively closed. The archive camera of the court went out and symbolically ended the documentary chronicle of this tragic event.